My new book, Awake, Observe, Shape, Transform, is now available on Amazon, along with the 90-day transformation journal. You'll find a link to these things in the episode description. Also, if you'd like to support this work, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers with no locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the site and check out the growing merch store, shirts, tanks, hats, and learn about one-on-one sessions with me by clicking the About button. And don't forget, the YouTube page has the podcast and binaural beats for meditation, rest, and sleep. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we're going to talk about a strange little book with a deceptively simple title. It Works. The Little Red Book That Makes Dreams Come True. That's its actual name. The title is It Works. It was written over 100 years ago by a man named R.H. Jarrett. At first, it was just released as R.H.J. He stayed relatively anonymous. Later on, I think we figured out his name was R.H. Jarrett. I don't know. Anyway, even though this book is short, meaning you could literally read the entire thing in 10 minutes, it has had this weird, lasting influence on the world of manifestation, self-help, and even spiritual practice. It's one of those books that gets passed around quietly. You find it in a thrift store, maybe a mentor hands it to you, or you download a PDF one night at 3 a.m. while you're down a rabbit hole trying to figure out why your life still feels like it's stuck on repeat. And then something clicks. At least that's what happened to me anyway. So in this episode, I want to break down It Works. Not just the book itself, but the mechanics behind it. I'm going to walk you through the original method, talk about why I created a new version with my own commentary, as well as a companion journal, and most importantly, explain why this little book actually works. Because it does work if you do it. And yeah, it's simple. But simple doesn't mean shallow. In fact, most of the time, the simplest things are the most powerful because they don't give you a place to hide. In fact, in the book, the author noted that this little book could have easily been 350 pages. But instead, he chose to keep it simple. So let's get to it. It works, and why it works. How a 100-year-old book still shapes reality through intention and belief. All right, so what does this thing actually say? Well, the first sentence of the book reads, if you know what you want, you can have it. And from there, it basically outlines a 3-step process. That's the whole book. It's just 3 steps. Step 1, write down what you want. Jarrett says, be clear, be specific. Don't be vague. Don't be poetic. Don't try to sound spiritual. Just write it down plainly and honestly, whatever it is. And then step 2, read that list at least 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night, every single day. Not just once in a while, not just when you're feeling inspired, but every day. And step 3, don't talk about it. Don't post about it. Don't run it by your friends. Don't seek validation. Just keep it to yourself and keep doing the work. That's it. It works. So if it works, why would I bother publishing a new edition of a book that's already been floating around for a century? Well, there's a few reasons. One of them is that I believe in bringing these books back. I believe in pushing these original texts. I believe that they had intention behind them, and I believe that they mean something. And what I've noticed is that this book, though it still works, but most people skip past it because it looks too simple. They treat it like novelty. Even I did when I first discovered it. I thought it can't be real. It's not long enough. You know, I'd heard about it in passing, and like always, I read it just for the sake of packing it into my consciousness, but I didn't really give it the credit it deserves. You know, even though it was subtly influencing me. And finally, because everyone learns differently. In fact, I learn differently, depending on where I am in my life. Sometimes I need to read a sprawling Vedic text, and sometimes I need to get the word from a weird little booklet. And then finally, the reason for doing a version with my own commentary is because I have found that these older power of positive thinking texts seem to fall short. They don't touch the more spiritual aspects of these methods and practices. They also seem to just say do it without explaining what's happening in the mind that's making these practices so effective. And when it comes to the more new age books on the law of attraction and these sorts of things, they too fall short. In fact, many of these books manage to go on for 300 pages or so without ever explaining what it is you're supposed to actually do. They offer nothing in the way of actual practices or methods. Personally, I believe we need both. That's why I wrote my new book, Awake, and that's why I decided to start doing commentary on these older texts as well. The first one being this little red book that we're discussing today. So don't just Joe Dispenza me by showing me studies on the power of meditation so that I'll go to your conference and listen to you tell me the same thing, sandwiched between testimonials from, people that used to be in wheelchairs or walked with a limp, but now, thanks to this practice that's thousands of years old that you're now reintroducing to the world, they can walk. And sorry, little digression, but I'm always surprised at people like Joe Dispenza, Eckhart Tolle, that manage to co-opt what Buddha taught without even mentioning Buddhism. I think it's fascinating. And then when they do, they kind of shit on it in a weird way. And I think that, if I could sound a little weird for a minute, I think that taints what they're teaching. I know that Buddha was a real man. Buddha was a man that lived, that changed the face of spirituality. And if you think that death is real, well, then this is a weird podcast for you, but it's not. So Buddha, his essence, his spirit, everything, it's still out there. And I have a bad feeling around co-opting what he taught and then not paying homage or giving credit. Anyway, so in my hubris, I've decided to bridge the gap and do commentary. So, this isn't some fluffy, wishful thinking pamphlet. It works, right? It's a concise, it's no nonsense. It's a guide to personal transformation. It's also a challenge because it holds up a mirror and says, are you clear? Are you consistent, or are you just consuming spiritual content and calling it a practice? So I put together a new edition that includes the original text, but with commentary from me breaking down what's really happening when you do the practice. And not in some mystical language, but in grounded terms. I also created a guided journal that pairs with the book, because writing things down isn't just about manifestation, it's about restructuring your mind. And that only happens through engagement, not inspiration. The journal includes prompts, and they're prompts for each day for 90 days, and they guide you a little deeper each day. And the point is to get out of your head and into conscious authorship, right? Into practice, because at the end of the day, clarity and repetition are not just spiritual hacks. They're methods for self-transformation. They transform your reality. So let's break this down. Why does something so simple work? Well, because when you strip away the fluff, when you stop complicating everything, you're left with direct confrontation between your desires and your patterns. This is mind restructuring. It's identity shifting. It's energetic alignment, whatever language you want to use. So let's take each step of the book and unpack it a little deeper. So step 1, write down what you want. And this sounds easy, right? But I've worked with hundreds of people over the years, whether it was one-on-ones or groups. But let me tell you, most people have no idea what they actually want. Even you that are listening to this right now, you're like, well, I know what I want. But I promise you, when you start doing this, you're going to think, I don't know what I want. And people say things like, I want peace, I want abundance, I want to be free. Okay, but what does that look like? Right? How do you know when you're there? Like, what are you really asking for? And Jarrett says, and it works, he says, write it down clearly and in as much detail as you can. And this is where the work begins, because in order to write it down, you have to kind of look inward. You have to be very honest, and you have to get specific. This is how we begin taking authorship of that unconscious story. This is how we stop recycling the same vague affirmations and actually start confronting the patterns that are shaping our lives. Now, step 2, read it 3 times a day. This is the repetition part. This is what changes your lens, your perception, your posture towards the world. And you might not notice it at first, right? But over time, something happens. You start making decisions that are more in alignment. You start noticing new opportunities. You feel less like a victim of your own circumstances and more like a participant, right? Less like a passenger, more like a pilot. And neuroscience backs this up. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition. Thoughts that get repeated become your beliefs, right? And beliefs become the world you live in. They become your identity. And identity becomes behavior. So you start acting as if, and then you experience the world that you're pretending to live in. So when you read your list every day, you're not just asking the universe for something. You're reshaping the way you think and act. You're syncing your conscious attention with a deeper intention. You're creating a new mental environment, and that mental environment dictates the outcomes that you experience. So step 3. Don't talk about it. Now, this part really pisses people off because we live in an age where sharing is currency, where people feel like they need to document every milestone, where your process has to be public to feel valid. But there is something sacred in privacy, especially when you're transforming. This is a very common idea through many of these older texts, and it's something I've been telling you guys for a very long time. This stuff requires faith. Faith requires doubt, but it rides that fine line that propels it, right? That keeps things interesting. So that being said, you don't need the doubt of others as well, right? You got enough doubt of your own. Think of it like this. Your faith rides a very thin rail, okay? On one side is just doubtless, arrogant knowing, and on the other side is doubt, right? Faith rides best when it's balanced on that rail. And since most people are just doubt-ridden do-nothings, you don't need to be sharing this stuff with them. You don't need their help, right? We don't need them sprinkling shit seeds on our dream field, as I once said to my mother and then turned into a t-shirt, which is available now on the website if you'd like to support the work I'm doing here. But this privacy is very important, especially when you're rewriting your mind, especially when you're still vulnerable to doubt, right? When you talk about your intention, you open it up to other people's fears, to their skepticism, their projections, and worst of all, your own need for external validation. I mean, how many times did you share a dream with someone only to get it covered in their fears, about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and then maybe you pulled back a little bit? So keep it private, keep it between you and the page. Let the changes speak for themselves. Let the fruits of your practice be the proof. That's real power. Now, when I first found it works, I almost ignored it. I thought, I already know this, but I didn't. Like, not really, because knowing isn't doing. And when I actually did it, when I committed to the process, wrote down the specifics and stayed with it, I realized that this wasn't about manifesting stuff. It was about alignment. Right? It was about retraining my mind to stop entertaining every stray thought, every self-doubt, every old pattern that told me who I was allowed to be, right? It was about directing my awareness on purpose, and that changes everything. And if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to try it, well, do it. Here's how. First, you get a journal. And it doesn't have to be the It Works journal that I created, but I would say that mine is prompted in a way that guides you through the experience, just like the Awake journal does. This way you don't possibly waste time writing about something that's not really going to get you anywhere. It keeps you on track. All of the journals that I do are laid out in a way that it keeps you on task, right? It keeps your mind in a training mode while you're doing it. And so often people give up on the journaling practice because they either don't see any immediate results or because they don't know what to write. So their conscious mind, right, the one that loves to stay safe in its current mode of thinking, just says, oh, well, we'll write when we have something to say. Well, that's like saying I'll meditate when I calm down, or like I'll work out and start eating right when I lose weight. Right? That's how the mind tricks us into remaining in a familiar hell rather than venturing out into an unfamiliar heaven. And another would be to write down what you want. Now, this is outside of the journal practice. This is one of the suggestions that R.H. Jarrett makes in It Works. Now, this list is not what you think is possible. It's what you want. Do you understand that? Not what you think is possible, but what you want, even if you think it's impossible. So be honest, be specific, fight the urge to be humble, and just write it down. If it sounds like too much or some unachievable goal, remember, that's your scared small self coming up with reasons to stay safe in its familiar hell, okay? So just write it down. Don't be afraid. No one's going to read it. It's just yours. And another would be to read it morning, afternoon, and night, even when you're tired. Especially when you're discouraged. That's when it matters most. Just do it. It's a practice. It's a prayer. It's a mantra. People tend to be unable or unwilling to stay the course. Most people don't know what it means to do the same thing every day, regardless of how you feel. If you show up for it, it shows up for you. You will get exactly what you give to this practice, or any practice for that matter. And I go more into that in the commentary edition. But finally, don't talk about it. Let the process be yours. Let the results be your testimony. Shut up about it, right? And here's the big one. Expect resistance. You're going to forget to read this list. You're going to have a doubtful inner dialogue when you do read it. It's okay, right? Power through it. You're going to want to tell someone what you're doing. You're going to want to give up. Fight those urges and keep moving. You're also going to want to tweak your list. And that's perfectly normal. Even moving things around in order of importance. In fact, Jarrett recommends that in the original book. It's a sign of growth. But if you stay with it, if you show up to the page every day, something in you will shift. Slowly, quietly, permanently. And then one day, you'll look around and realize that you're living inside of the life you once wrote down. I promise. And again, I go more into that in the commentary edition, but please just stick with it. And I'm not here to tell you that It Works is the answer to everything, because it's not. It's a tool. It's a mirror. It's a way of engaging with your own mind, your own reality in a very direct and honest way. But I will say this. The things that have changed my life the most have always been the simplest, right? Writing, watching, witnessing, repeating, and trusting that silence, not babbling about everything you're up to, right? But that silence has its own kind of momentum. And it works because you work it, right? What's the AA slogan? It works if you work it. And that's the truth. So if you'd like a copy of this more modern edition of It Works with my commentary, you can find it on Amazon. As I mentioned, there's also a journal with daily prompts that helps you stay consistent with the practice, keeps you on track. There will be links in the description of this podcast. You could also just go to the website and find it there. I got to update a few things before this comes out. But all of this stuff is designed to help you move from just being inspired about something to actually transforming your reality, and to do it without becoming overwhelmed or lost. So I love you. You reminded me. Now I'm reminding you. So thank you. If the infinite spark of being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. And you can do that by checking out Awake and the 90-Day Transformation Journal, both now available on Amazon. The links are in the description. If you want to support this work on a monthly basis, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers that have no locked content yet, just support. You can also swing by the website, check out the merch store, learn more about working with me one-on-one, and as always, the YouTube page has full episodes as well as binaural beats to help you with your practice. So I'll see you next week. Thank you, and I love you.